In our last video, we learned how to take a quadratic equation and solve it by completing the square. And that's easy enough to do if we have an equation like this, where the coefficient on the x squared is a 1. We don't actually write it out. It's an implied 1. Because when we write x squared, that already means 1 unit of whatever x is squared. But supposing we had instead 4x squared minus 2x minus 5 equals 0. Completing the square won't work if we try to apply it when the equation is in this form. We're going to have to get rid of that coefficient on the x squared. So first, let's move everything which doesn't have an x in it to the other side of the equation. Let's add a 5 to both sides. So these two cancel out, and now we have 4x squared minus 2x is equal to 5. What we do now is we want to clear the 4 from the x squared, so we're going to divide everything on both sides of the equation by 4. As long as we do it to one side and the other, it's a legitimate proceeding. It will change the form but not the value of the expression. And the 4's cancel out, and now we have just what we wanted. A bare x squared minus 2/4 reduces to 1/2 x, and that's equal to 5/4. Just as we did before, we're going to take the linear coefficient, that is to say the coefficient on the linear variable, the one that has a exponent of 1. It's just a first degree exponent. And we're going to take the linear coefficient, sign and all, negative 1/2. We're going to have it. We're going to multiply by 1/2. Okay, negative 1/2 times plain old 1/2, that gives us negative 1/4. So we take our linear coefficient, we have it, we square it, and then we add it to both sides. Adding it to both sides of the equation will give us a x squared minus 1/2 x, which is what we have over here, plus negative 1/4 squared, and that will be equal to 5/4 plus negative 1/4 squared. Now we're going to take the squared portions of the left-hand side and bring them down without the squares. So we've got an x and we've got a negative 1/4. We'll bring those two down and we'll square it. On this side we have a 5/4 plus 1/4 squared. Well, 5/4 is added to, 1/4. When we square it, the negativity goes away. A negative times a negative is a positive, and 1/4 squared turns into 1/16. So we've got 5/4 plus 1/16. Now I'd like to combine these two fractions. To do so, I have to give them a common denominator. So let's multiply 5/4 by 4/4, which is just another form of 1. 4/4 is equal to 1. So when we multiply that across, we get 5/4 is going to be equal to 20, and 4/4 will be equal to 16. So we handle this. Now we've got 1/16 plus 20/16. That gives us 21/16. Now our goal is to find out what x is worth. So we want to put everything which isn't x on the other side of the equation. So the best way of clearing the situation we have here, where x is in parentheses and that squared is, let's take the square root of that and the square root of the other side of the equation as well. The x minus 1/4 squared becomes x minus 1/4, and that's equal to, the square root of 21 over 16. That's the same as the square root of 21 over the square root of 16. The square root of 21 we really can't simplify any further, but the square root of 16 turns out to be 4, since 4 squared, 4 times 4, is equal to 16. We have a perfect square which we're taking the square root of, so that solves itself rather simply. Now, to find out what x is, and we need to make this plus or minus. because we don't know what the content of this was, whether it was positive or negative. Once it's squared, the outcome is going to be positive, but if it were positive, it would give us a positive outcome when it was squared. If it was negative, it would give us a positive outcome when it was squared. To account for the ambiguity of this squared expression, we put a plus or minus sign here so we can account for both possibilities. Now, let's get the x all by itself. Let's clear away the 1/4 from the left-hand side by adding 1/4 to both sides, plus 1/4. And now we've got x, 1/4 cancel, is equal to plus or minus the square root of 21/4 plus 1/4. So our answers are x equals 1/4 plus the square root of 21/4, or x equals 1/4 minus the square root of 21/4. And that's as simple as we can make our answers. Sometimes when we solve a quadratic, the answers aren't nice and neat. They're these untidy, clumsy outcomes. But what's important is not that they be neat and tidy, but that they be accurate and that the solutions be complete. And here we have all the solutions in accurate, if untidy form for this quadratic.